this evening. I think part of the vision for the church community here, Jan, it's the little church with a big heart. And it's such a beautiful way to express what the position of this community, this church community has to not just those who come here regularly, but for those who come by, drive by, see the latest sign that the Mosses have put up at the road. And it's really meant to be a vibrant place for the community, not just for those who attend on a regular basis. So we're really thrilled to have you all here. It's my great pleasure to have you join me in welcoming Dr. Carrie Arnold. Carrie is a professor in thanatology at a program at King's University College at Western. She has been working in the field of grief and bereavement and support for 23 years. I first met Carrie almost 20 years ago when Carrie was doing her first graduate degree at Western, and she has just gone on to become such a fundamental part of the knowledge base that we all share. And when we not only go through a process of loss in our own lives, but loss in the lives of others that we're called on to support. So this evening came about from a July morning when Scott and Shelley were over having coffee. And we introduced Jenny, little Jenny, our adorable golden retriever puppy, and got talking about various things. And part of the conversation between Patty and Shelley was, things have changed so much. There's a real sense of longing for the way things used to be. And it's not just, old people thinking about the good old days. It was really, we've been through a lot. We've been through COVID. Life isn't the way it used to be. We have a sense of loss of things that we used to count on that we can no longer count on. Many of us lost close personal friends and family through that process as well. So part of the conversation led to, maybe we can do something. And tonight is the do something. And so that's why we're really thrilled, Carrie, to have you with us. So Carrie's going to give a presentation, but it's really meant to be a conversation. And so afterward, Carrie's done with the formal part of it, we really hope that people will share their ideas and just how have you chosen to cope with what you've been through. And maybe we can draw on each other's strength as a result. Alrighty? And then there are treats and juice. Coffee treats and juice. Coffee treats. So there's coffee, treats, and juice to follow. So Carrie, with further ado.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for having me. And so, can everybody hear me? Okay, perfect. If at any point you can't, just let me know, and I think Jan at the back will adjust the technology, and I will try my best not to break the technology. Still not my skill set. So thank you for having me, and so thank you, Alan, for such a lovely introduction. And again, it's been such a nice kind of trajectory, because at any point in time in my studies or my career where I've needed just an anchor or some guidance, you've always offered that. So I'm very grateful to you and to Patty. So thank you for just the kindness you've extended to me and to my lovely fiance in the back. My lovely fiance is in the back, and so is his mother, and so he assured me that he was going to oppose everything I said and say things like, I don't know what I'm talking about, so I need a security detail to bounce those two out of here if they get unruly and out of control. So whoever would like to do that is welcome to. So thank you so much. So I will offer somewhat of kind of a academic-ish conversation just to give us some benchmarks about what we're talking about in terms of grief, but then certainly we'll have an opportunity to have conversations should you wish to. So you're very welcome to switch the slide, Jan, if you'd like to.
I would be delighted.
Thank you. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to invite all of us to be present to grief today, so we'll talk about that a little bit. I'd like to get to know who's in the room, just briefly, what's brought you here. We'll talk a little bit about death and non-death losses, because so many times people think that a non-death loss doesn't really lead to grief, but we know that it does. So we'll orient ourselves to that as well. I'll offer just brief theoretical frameworks, just so that we can all move past this idea that grief occurs in stages. I think we've all grown up on that, but grief doesn't happen in stages. So if we have some kind of framework, it can often anchor our own grief experience. I'll offer some suggestions on what we do when we're living alongside and within a loss experience. We'll talk a little bit about rituals, how to respond, and then again, open it up to questions and discussion. So if at any point along the way you have questions, you're certainly very welcome to pause and ask, or we can save them until the end. It's really what everybody prefers. Okay, thanks, Jan. So what I wanted to offer as we get started, anytime we talk about grief and loss, we know that there's going to be a lot of grief and loss in the room. And so we are raised in a culture where we're not supposed to cry or talk about it or share or upset other people. So when we share conversations about grief, many of us start to feel uncomfortable or awkward, or what if I cry, or what if I don't know what to say? And so I just invite you into a space together to just let it be what it is, right? If there are tears, if there's frustration, if there is your own emotion that is just sitting with you, I just invite you in this lovely, beautiful old church just to hold space for that, and we will hold space with that together as a community. The other thing we often invite people to do when you're experiencing any kind of discomfort is to get really curious about it. When many of us experience distress, we go to, I shouldn't feel this way, I wish I didn't feel this way, why am I feeling this way? And that creates a tremendous amount of strain and tension. And so if we can just be curious with, here it is, this is what I'm experiencing at this moment. And if we can authentically engage with it, it can sometimes lead to greater connection and awareness, rather than a sense of, I wish I wasn't feeling this way and how quickly can I get out of it. So I just invite you into that authentic engagement with whatever arises for you in our time together this evening. So introductions. The little S moved. Talk to my tech person. So can I ask just who's here? What brought you here? Are you a member of the church, the community? What is it that you're kind of hoping to get out of it this evening? Do we need to pass the mic, Alan? I'll give that to you. Thank you. I'm just curious what brought you.
I'm just loud, so you don't do that. My name is Shelley, and I'm a member of this church community, and I know Helen and Patty fairly well. I've had a wine or two with them besides coffee.
Nice.
I wanted to come because I have not experienced a major loss, a person or an animal or something that I love in a many years, which is very nice for me. But I miss things that were before pandemic.
Yeah.
You know, and so there's a sense of disconnect there.
Okay, thank you for offering that, Shelley.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Anyone else?
May, you're loud too. You're loud too.
Yes. I'm May Piggott, and I'm a member of the church. I have been for the last 20 years. I've had several religious experiences, etc., but ended up with my roots here. And I've had many losses, but I found that at one point in my life, I had to just stop and see a psychologist, and that brought me grounded, and I can go back to that from many years ago through the losses that I am still experiencing, and realize that faith has a lot to do with improving your outlook. Yes, and I think that, I guess maybe I'm sort of a fatalist, because I think some things happen and you make the best of them if you can.
Yeah.
And I've been able to do that.
Thank you for offering that, May.
And also, I brought a very dear friend who's been friends for a long time,
Okay.
who's had a recent loss, and
Okay.
I'm feeling the sorrow with her.
Okay. Okay. So we will just hold that sort of in the spirit of community and support. Okay. So our condolences. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Harry's quietly loud.
My name's Harry Zanin. I've been the treasurer here for a number of years, and 4 weeks ago I suffered a very serious heart attack, which has been kind of life-altering, having to adjust, etc., etc. So I just want to hear what you may have to say on something like that.
Okay. Thank you for offering that. And I hope that you have really good supportive care around you at this time. There is the supportive care.
But this supportive care crumbles easily. And I've been having a hard time for a few years now. I've only had 2 COVID shots, and shortly after the second one, I had a serious infection, and so what's been happening, I get very ill twice a year, and they were calling it a shingles incident with the heavy fatigue, a little bit of a rash, but they have taken that back and said it doesn't follow suit with that. So I'm going through a lot of tests, and I'm just at the end of another heavy fatigue period. And I'm from a large family, and because of COVID, my older siblings were really disconnected, and so I'm not seeing them. And my one sister, I expect she'll pass before Christmas, and Harry and I are a great support, but I am one person that keeps a lot inside. I put the smile on, and I like to be active and engaged in things, but I am having a really hard time doing that. So that's why I'm here. We were supposed to be away in Arizona, and I was so disappointed I was going to miss you.
So they canceled Arizona.
Harry had a heart attack, so we had to stay home. And then I got really sick, so I had to keep Harry company like 24/7. You know, there's some benefits there, right?
Yeah. And there's cookies in the back.
Thank you.
Thank you for offering that. Thank you.
I want to follow with what Beth just said about keeping a smile on. And I think that everybody in this room has come to a certain age where we've all had some kind of grief. And it may not be fresh, but we all understand it. And I think that as a culture, we stuff it. We stuff our feelings down. And so that would be something that I would like to explore.
Okay, thank you.
I usually talk loud enough, but maybe not right now. In the last 7 years, I've lost my brother, my mom, and my dad, and I kind of dealt with that. But 5 years ago, I lost my husband. He went for a motorcycle ride after we had our morning coffee, and he never came home. I am not dealing with that. I just don't know how to. And everybody just seems to think around me that I should just suck it up and move on with my life. And it's very hard. So I just don't know how to suck it up.
Okay.
So.
And I'm not sure that anyone's meant to suck it up.
No. And I don't feel that I'm meant to suck it up, but I put on a happy face every day and I go on with life, but it's not life. I lost my little brother, and then my mom went, and then my dad just went last June. And I'm thinking, well, that's different. But my life partner, who lost his life 6 months after retirement, and we were making plans, we worked all our life for this. He spent 25 years in the military, where he was gone 8 months at a time, and then come home for a month and gone 6 months. He did Egypt, he did Cyprus, he did Bosnia, and all of that, we stayed together and we were strong. And then 6 months after he retires, and he worked out at EMDC at the jail. He was a corrections officer, and that was a toll. And we held together very strongly, and then 6 months later, I couldn't even see him. I couldn't see him after he passed because it was a closed casket. So I just don't feel like I've never processed it properly, and it's just not the way I want to be or how I mentally should be.
Okay.
And I've gone for help, counseling and stuff, but there's really nothing anybody can say to me that seems to sink in.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No apologies.
And what you just said, with the title of tonight's conversation is, what do you say when there's nothing left to say?
That's why I'm here, ready to get more
Yeah.
And I've been still working for 22 years. And I read that religiously. And I'm not a member of this church, but I'm thinking, you know what? If anybody has anything they can say or anything that, it's just, how do you get rid of what's right here, but I can't get it up here to coordinate with how I feel.
Yeah. So hopefully something tonight will speak to you in some way, and we'll see where the conversation goes, right? We know that there's a lot of need in the community in general for grief support, for death-related losses, for support following illness, but also how things were before and how they are now. And what seems to be the common thread through everything you've all shared is the need for community and each other. But one of the things we know so deeply about grief is that it causes this fragmentation and isolation, both in our own lives and families, but also within our communities. So we'll circle back to some of the things that you've shared and see where we land at the end of our conversation today. So thank you for offering this feedback and just introducing yourselves in this space. So as we do a presentation like this or come together, we always think about what is our responsibility to each other when we talk about really difficult things. So I just want to put that out there. Some of you know each other from this community, some of you are new. So as we move through this discussion, I just invite you to think about, what is it that you need? How do you hold space for vulnerability and connection with each other, with whom you know and people that you may not know? So just anchor that in yourself as we go through this. What does each of us need to engage meaningfully with this conversation, right? When we share our losses, we also hear others. So we're just accountable to our own selves and our own wellness. And as we're doing today, we're having a group discussion. We may also have connections with people sitting around us as well. So we'll see how that goes. So as we move through our conversation, some of you have already shared what brought you here. Is there anything that you need as a group as we go through this discussion? Do you want confidentiality? Do you want time to talk to people that you're not familiar with? Do you like this kind of group format? How would you like it to go today?
We don't know.
Okay. Well, we'll just see what unfolds. I have slides. We also have a conversation that can just happen. So we'll kind of have it organically unfold. Yeah, Jan, thank you. So what I will invite, we always do this at the start when we really move into grief, because it's one thing for us to begin this way, but then when we start talking about it, things can kind of shift and move. We always just invite people to get grounded, right? So just kind of anchor yourself and your breath. Notice your feet on the floor, and just invite yourself to take some deep breaths so that when we go through this information, the parts that you need to take will click in, and the parts that don't fit for you at this time, you can just let them move through. So I just invite you to take a couple deep breaths, if that feels okay for you. Okay, so I just invite you to take one really big deep breath and one long, slow exhale. And we'll just move into really talking about grief itself. Okay, thanks, Jan. So this kind of ties in with some of the comments have been made. So there's an Austrian philosopher, Ludwig Wittgenstein. What we cannot speak about, we pass over in silence. Or all I know is what I have words for. So in a community where we're taught to suck it up, where we're taught to just be really stoic, or we don't say anything, we end up having this struggle all by ourselves, again, in that isolation, that sense of being fragmented. If we don't have a language for grief or a way to connect with each other around our losses or our sorrow, then we don't have the words, and then we don't have the vocabulary, and then it means we don't have a response. And so again, sometimes it's really hard for us to find the words, and maybe we don't always need words, but what we need is a presence. What we need is some kind of way of communicating around grief and loss, and hopefully through some of this material we'll have some ideas around what may fit for each of us. So what is grief? We hear it all the time. Grief is an adaptive response to loss. We seem to think now that we have all these different words and terms for loss, or when we try to put labels on people, or you're not grieving the right way, or you're doing it wrong, or people will say you're still grieving, or why are you feeling this way still? And so what we want to really orient in our awareness tonight is that grief is a normative response to loss. Everyone will go through it at some point in time. And so grief is all-encompassing, right? So it affects how we function in so many aspects of our lives and in our relational circles. And so whether it's a spouse or a friend or a pet, it really does disrupt all aspects of our lives. And there's this idea that as time goes on, we should be better or fine. But in some cases, as you've said, it just gets harder, because not only are you grieving a traumatic death, but you're also losing out on your future plans. So your life is surrounded every day by loss. And so then when you are holding that in your awareness all the time, it makes it really difficult to get grounded in what you want your life to be now. I don't know if that fits for you. Yeah. So death and non-death losses, typically we're all in midlife. Do we all agree that we're all middle-aged? Sure. Let's do that. I really thought that was a generous term to use today, so I'm going to put myself in there too. Parents, siblings, pets, friends, and coworkers. Typically, at this life stage, we are not experiencing the deaths of children, although that can happen, but it's not a typical normative loss at this life stage. Non-death losses, separation, divorce, changing careers, right? Sometimes people can work in a high-profile career for 30 or 40 years, and then they're downsized, and they hire 4 20-year-olds to do their job, right? And the loss from that is absolutely devastating. Loss of friendships, either people grow, change, outgrow friendships, people move, but this is also a really significant change at midlife. Health concerns and illness. So not having the mobility or the capacity that you used to have, energy. Loss of the capacity to sleep, right? Insomnia and how that disrupts people's lives. Dealing with chronic or long-term illness can also change every aspect of a person's life in ways that are unexpected. Financial strain also brings about significant losses in the cascade that follows if there's financial strain. It could lead to housing insecurity or food insecurity, and a real struggle to know what to do at this life stage. And then parenting strain, right? So if we're raising adult children or their grandchildren, or if they're struggling, it deeply affects all of us as well. So these are some typical losses. And we highlight it this way to dispel this idea that grief only happens when someone dies, right? Grief will also happen around these other non-death losses as well. Grief can also become much more complicated when some of these losses are long-standing. So we have terms like chronic sorrow. So if somebody is dealing with a significantly debilitating lifelong illness, it's not going to resolve. And so there can be this pervasive sense of loss or sorrow or hardship that is unpredictable. It comes and goes, but there's no end point. Okay, so there's these experiences that we can have that it really feels there's no solution for. So what do we know about grief? So we all know the lived experience. We know that feeling when it's hard to breathe or get out of bed, or that feeling like someone is pressing on your chest and you're suffocating. In terms of how do we respond to grief, we've all heard of the 5 stages. I'm sure you've heard of this. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross created those 5 stages in the late 60s. So this is an interesting story. She was in a hospital that had 6 stories to it. And every floor she went, she tells this story in all her palliative care documentaries. She went into these hospitals and said, I want to talk to patients who are dying. And on all 6 floors in the late 60s, she was told no patients are dying here. Because at that time, believe it or not, people weren't told they were sick. They were told, you'll get better, you'll go home soon. Doctors did not tell patients they were terminally ill because they felt like it was a medical failure. So she eventually worked her way into finding 200 people who were end stage and willing to talk to her. And she created these 5 stages. But they were the 5 stages of loss before somebody was about to die, not the 5 stages of someone who is grieving the death of somebody else. But because we like things to be neat and tidy and linear and really organized in our very intellectual and cognitive culture, these 5 stages of grief has been picked up as this is how you grieve. First you feel shock, and then you feel sad, or all the 5 stages. But what's interesting is that's not how we grieve. Right? Grief is very multidimensional. It comes and goes. There's an ebb and flow to it that is not linear or task-based. And so we give tremendous credit to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross because she taught us that life and death, there's so much there we need to learn about and to experience, but that now we have contemporary grief models that give us a much greater range in how to deal with our own sorrow and loss. So if someone says to you, let me tell you about the 5 stages of grief, you can now say that's a great piece of historical experiences in the thanatological movement, but it's 70 years out of date now, maybe 60. I'm not going to do math today because it's, thank you. I was close with 70. Thank you for thank you for the math. So just to give you a framework in case this is helpful for you, one of the frameworks that we know it has theoretical and empirical support is called the dual process model. The dual process model is a framework that allows people to move between what we call loss orientation. This is where we don't want to see anybody. We have deeply heavy emotion, really this sense of hopelessness and helplessness and just utter sorrow. And then weeks or months later, we might come out a little bit and be okay to go for coffee or to learn how to do something that we didn't know how to do before that person's death. And so that's restoration orientation. And so depending on our life experiences, our relational processes throughout our life, we will move in and out of those 2 frameworks as needed. Children naturally do this. Right? They'll be really sad one moment, and the next minute they're off with their dog and an ice cream, and then they'll be in bed for a couple of days, right? So kids naturally oscillate. Adults, our ability to go back and forth is also influenced from other losses in our lives. And so losses are cumulative. So those can also become impacted in such a way that there's just this sense of inertia around not knowing how to move forward. Another framework we have is meaning making. It's basically what it sounds, that we try to make sense of what happened. We try to explore the nature of the relationship we had with that person, and over time may find a sense of identity change. Sometimes people will say they feel more resilient, or they feel stronger, or they will pursue a career path as a result of their loss experiences. Other times, if somebody was really suffering for a prolonged period of time, there's a term called benefit finding, where we feel a sense of, I'm grateful that person's no longer suffering. And so as people go through the grief process and grief experience, they'll navigate these different identities and changes within their social context and the dynamics, again, both interpersonally within their family or within their broader social circles, and their ability to just, again, make sense of what's happened and to explore the meaning of that relationship. The other one, the helpful concepts from this one, the assumptive world. A researcher back in the 70s and 80s did a lot of research around why is it that we are so shattered when a loss occurs. So she did a tremendous amount of research and then narrowed it down to say that we all have 3 core assumptions. I'm a pretty good person, the world is a fairly good, just place, and people get what they deserve, and there's justice. So these 3 concepts here allow us to get up every day and go outside the door. right? Because if we got up every morning and thought everything outside is terrifying and I'm not going outside, none of us would ever leave the house. So we operate on these three implicit assumptions, but if something tragic happens or multiple tragic things happen, or there's prolonged illness that feels unfair, or why is this happening to me, then these assumptions become shattered. So alongside the grief experience, we are then having to rebuild these shattered assumptions. Again, even COVID, right? Why aren't things the way they used to be? The world isn't the same anymore. Or if we see what's happening in Ukraine or in the Middle East right now, these assumptions become very shattered and threatened. And so on top of trying to navigate the loss and sorrow and complex emotions that go with a grief experience, we are then having to isolate what pieces are now fragmented and shattered, and how do we begin to rebuild those? And again, often in isolation from each other. The last one is something called continuing bonds. So if we look back 100 years ago when Freud first started differentiating grieving from depression, there was this idea that suck it up, walk it off, you have a few days, why aren't you better now? And there was this idea, we all hear about it, of the letting go. We now know from theory and research that the continuing bonds framework allows us to stay in relation to the person without having to forget or move on, excuse me, or this idea that we must get over. And so the idea with a continuing bond is that death ends the physical life, but the ongoing relationship can be enduring, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. Frameworks, but I didn't want this to be overly academic, but we just give you this framework to move past this really restrictive linear process, or this idea that you are not grieving correctly and you should be over it by now. Are there any questions about this part before we move on? Okay, thanks, Jan. So this is where we'll talk a little bit more about how do we live alongside loss. So one of the phrases that we often hear is, how do we continue to love in absence? So if somebody has died and we've lost that person, what does it look like to still stay in some kind of intrapsychic connection with them, even when they're not physically here? So some people will go to a gravesite and talk to their person, or I have so many clients that will come in and say, I talk to my spouse all the time. Or I'll say, these kids are driving me crazy, like, why can't you come and help? You know, sweet moments like that, or they'll have different connections or spiritual beliefs that allow them to take comfort in, at some point they will connect again. Or they'll host charity golf tournaments or fundraisers, or they'll create different mementos or tokens so that loved ones after that can know that person's story. Relearning the world, as I talked about, this is a massive undertaking, especially if so much of your life is now different after COVID, during an illness, changes in family relationships, or just waking up every morning to, this is not what my life was supposed to be right now. My life was supposed to be something different. So that relearning is an ongoing daily task in the midst of grief. We talked about shattered assumptions, but sometimes it's helpful to name those, to be really explicit about what else got fragmented here. Aside from the physical absence of this person, what else is broken that needs attention in my own well-being? We're going to talk about ritual in a little bit and have an opportunity to share possibly rituals that you engage in or might like to do. How many of you are creative? Paint, sing, music, art, any of those kinds of things? Yeah, what kinds of things do you do?
I do stained glass, I do card
Lovely.
making, I crochet and knit.
Nice. When you are in those tasks, what do you notice? What do you notice when you're doing them? Is your mind really focused?
I relax and
Yeah. Do you kind of get lost in that flow experience of creating? Okay. So that actually is a really adaptive way of responding to grief, our creative tasks. So there is research out there on this. There's great YouTube videos. There are some lovely artists that are out there now that talk about creative expression. There's also an international team of art therapists that go around to, say, places like Ukraine or Gaza, for that matter, and use art to help support people, because getting in that flow state actually changes and shifts how your brain works. And so those are really helpful. It does not fix or change things, but that creative expression allows for the softening of some of that overwhelming grief. There was another hand up here who was creative. Did I miss that? Yes.
I haven't been creative lately. I'm Shelley's cousin, so I'm not a member of the church, and I lost my partner 2 months ago, so it's really fresh. And but I'm starting to get, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yeah, it is. It is very hard, because 2 months is very recent. Yeah. Yeah, my condolences. Okay. So again, I just invite you, whatever is there for you, we are just, again, sharing this space and community today, and we can certainly talk a little bit more as a group.
I'm not so emotional. I find it difficult. Like, for example, I went and got gas 3 weeks ago. The guy says, "How are you doing?" And I started to cry. I just find that so awkward. But again, it's what our society is about.
Yes. And I hear these stories all the time from clients or family members that they're trying to go about their day, and someone saying, "Here's your coffee, hun," is enough for them to just dissolve into tears. And I think we need to have, there's a term out there called grief literacy. It's about having a grief literate society. So to say, "Thank you for my coffee, and I've just experienced the death of someone I love dearly, and I'm just really sad today." Right? This is where we need to get to, so that we don't have to move away and hide in shame. And so often when I work with clients and they tell about these experiences, I invite them just to say, "I'm grieving right now." Right? This is grief. Because again, in those small moments, we might then have an opportunity for connection rather than disconnection and feeling further fragmented. But it is very hard to do at first. And it's also exhausting, right? I really wish, do you remember, none of us were here 100 years ago because we're all middle-aged. But I think 100 years ago, people used to wear the black armbands, or people would wear black for a year. I think we've done a disservice by not doing that. Because if you would see some kind of indication or a little button, we then hopefully would move into a place of compassion and kindness. I really wish we would bring some of those rituals back. I think we've become less grief literate than we used to be. Did we get all of them? Jan, I wasn't reading. The last point, thank you, Jan, is to allow grief to be in our reach. And so you sharing that experience actually highlights that when we're in social situations and we feel that sense of shame, or we have to fake it, right? I think a few of you said you just put the smile on and fake it, but to some extent that makes it even heavier and more exhausting. We all do it, and yet it's hard. And so at some point, the hope is, as we push more students through our program, that we start to create greater vocabulary and literacy around loss and grief experiences, so that it can be within our reach rather than something we're always fighting to hide. And so in spaces like this, the invitation is to just be with grief in whatever way it needs to be in our lives. Thanks, Jan. So ritual, coming to church is a ritual. Sometimes for people, engaging in creative tasks feels like a ritual. Playing tennis can be something that you do every week that just feels so important. And so a ritual is any gesture done with emotion and intention to connect transpersonal energies for the purposes of healing. And it's reparative. And so in addition to feeling more disconnection or fragmentation after times like COVID, coming together in ritual can be incredibly transformative, whatever that is. Funerals are rituals, memorial services, having a celebration of life, coming together to honor whatever it is that we need to honor. Rituals provide two things, so a sense of containment. So this here, we are creating containment and some release. It also allows us a safe place to fall. So when we have rituals, this is the coming together. There's a sense of we are all bearing witness to our collective sorrow. Or again, these COVID experiences that we had together. How do we share that in such a way that is transformative for us, that we feel less alone and less isolated? Again, a willingness to touch our own sorrow. For many of us, we will fight against that because it's too hard. But if we are engaged in ritual in a community of others, then we have the capacity to somehow transform this experience. Many of us wish, I want it to stop, I want it to go away, I don't want this anymore. But if we can see what is there within us to help us live alongside this loss for now until it shifts, rituals can be a really wonderful way to engage. The other thing that's really difficult is when we don't come together in community or with a sense of ritual, then we are then having to bear witness to our sorrow alone, which creates greater isolation. So this is where we get to the part, what do we say when there's nothing to say? So I just jotted down a few things to talk about in terms of what does this look like. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of community and connection. I don't know if this church will start hosting grief groups or support groups or checking in with each other, but social support and connection is one of the most powerful ways to be in this, provided you're with other people who can just hold space. If you are with people who say, suck it up, walk it off, just smile, that is not the kind of support that's adaptive in these grief experiences. So building compassionate, grief-literate communities is really the goal of the work within our program at King's. I went to a talk a few years ago at King's. A colleague in disability studies put it on, and they showed a documentary. It's on dementia, and I cannot remember the name of the documentary. So please, nobody take that too seriously. It truly had something to do with memory. But I'm going to ask for a pass on this one. My colleague's name is Pam. It's a really good movie. And in the film, there was a man. Let's say his name was Michael. It might have been Tom, I'm not sure. But what I do remember, and this is the shining moment in this very awkward story, is in dementia care, he said, as people age, as we all go through grief and loss and life experiences, there's a whole lot of messy and awkward. And he said, this goes to your point as well, that we have the awkwardness and then we all back away. And he has this phrase that I haven't forgotten. Am I willing to risk feeling awkward in order to be in connection with you right now? And it was such a beautiful phrase. And again, in the documentary, he went on to explain how he worked with this. If you would like the name of that documentary, I'll find out and send it to Alan and Patty. But that phrase. So in these moments where we don't know what to say, in these moments where we are struggling, to lean in and say, I'm okay to feel a little awkward if it means you and I can connect right now. Can we just sit with the awkward? And usually there can be a joke or there might be some tears, but we name the awkwardness and that somehow dispels it enough so that we can get to the connection that we all sincerely strive for. So if you take anything away from this, I really love that phrase, and it works, right? I sometimes have used it with my kids, or I've used it with my clients. We're going to be really awkward right now, but it allows us to be in connection with what we need to do, and it shifts, right? Then we're not sitting in the awkward that we don't want to name. We get to name it, whatever it is. People might say, I'm afraid to cry. I'm a messy crier. I don't know what I'm going to say. And you just move through that together. Again, alongside the importance of connection and community, even going for a walk. Walks are lovely, or even just sitting together, having a coffee. That sense of community and connection is so important. Again, what do we say sometimes? Tell me about your spouse. Tell me about your son. Tell me about anyone. Because who doesn't love to talk about the person who died? What's your favorite memory? What did they do that drove you crazy? Right? Because you know those stories are in there too. What do you miss the most? And yes, we might cry. Okay. It's okay, right? Or is there a memory you wish to share? So again, we move past I'm so sorry or my condolences, but you allow that person to share the person who died with you. And that is a beautiful gift that we often overlook because we don't know if we should ask. And it's okay to ask. And if people say, I actually don't want to talk about it right now, then that's okay too. But there is the invitation. And the last one, and I think it may be at the very bottom there, is I actually don't have any words, or I'm not sure what to say right now, but I'm right here. And if you just need me to stay here for a few hours with you while you have a nap or bring you coffee, throw in a load of laundry, I'm right here. Right? And so when people are bereaved, they often feel that they are a burden or they don't want to impose on others. And so we can just show up with casseroles. I don't recommend showing up with puppies or kittens, but I think that those kinds of things might be well received. But casseroles, coffee, groceries, cupcakes, I think, are always a big hit. There are these lovely ways to build that connection in. Wine. I was going to go there, and then I thought I'm in church. I don't know if we're allowed to show up. Tequila. Yeah, a bottle of tequila and a casserole. I think we could start a movement. So all this to say, to just lean into the awkward and be present. Right? It is messy. Grief is messy. It is painful, but we lean into it. Right? And that's just part of our existence together. And the more that we can hopefully move into a grief-literate society, the less that we will all struggle or suffer by ourselves. Yep, next one, Jan, thank you. So I've listed here some resources. I can send these on to Alan and Patty if you wish, but I never want to do a talk like this and then not have some kind of follow-up. And so there are 3 therapists. I'll give you their background should you wish to follow up. Melissa Page Nichols is local. She's in London. She offers both virtual and in-person sessions. She's been doing this work for maybe 15 years. She has a really diverse background in sort of general counseling, but certainly specializes in grief and loss. And she's taking clients. I made sure all 3 of these people have space. Rena Sheskin, she's only available virtually. She's Ontario trained but US based right now, but she runs things virtually beautifully. She's been doing this work for about 30 years. She has incredible depth as a therapist. She also is the lead volunteer at a hospice organization in Chicago. She's done end-of-life training, dignity therapy, end-of-life review, and so she is exceptionally skilled and can hold a tremendous amount of space for grief and sorrow. She also has space right now. Sheila O'Donovan is an art therapist. I don't know if any of you were born and raised in Kilworth. The O'Donovan girls used to terrorize this neighborhood for a long time. I've known Sheila and her family for a really long time. Sheila's the middle child, if that tells you anything. She's also US based. She's lovely for any of you who are watching this on video. The O'Donovan family are wonderful. All the girls are fantastic. So Sheila is also available virtually, and again, her art therapy, she works with children and clients, or children and adult clients, and she manages to do this virtually in a really beautiful way and hold space. And so all 3 are highly skilled. So thank you, Jan. So what I'd like to do now is, before we get to this part, would you like some opportunities to connect with each other with people you don't know, or would we like to have some opportunity to talk as a group?
We also have coffee.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, I can smell it.
Yeah.
We get a coffee.
Yeah. So what I would offer in closing, as we think about what it is that's most important, is having a sense of connection and orientation to your own needs. And so one of the things that we talk about a lot is having compassion. And so this comes from a really beautiful book called The Wise Heart by Jack Kornfield, and he is a Western-trained psychology person, but he also has spent a lot of time in Buddhist retreats, and so he blends those two perspectives in such a way that offers, he hopes, comfort. So we're not in church for a religious reason, but I would invite you to do this with me, almost as a prayer. So if you're willing to, you can, but you don't have to. I would like us to say this together, because when you say it or just read it, it doesn't land. But if we say it together, there might be some resonance. So I would like to ask you to do this with me. So may you be held in compassion. May your pain and suffering ease. May you be at peace. May I be held in compassion. May my pain and suffering ease. May I be at peace. So when you read that out loud and hear your own voice and the voice of your community, what do you notice about those words?
They're soft words.
Yeah.
They are.
Compassion and suffering to easing suffering. They're soft words.
Yeah, the kind.
Yeah. Okay. And so this is a really easy thing to hold. And so I've often taught this to many of my clients. So in those moments where the edges of grief feel really, really sharp and there's judgment and I wish it didn't feel this way and I wish it would go away, I often write this down for them to just sit for a moment and just say these words. The other thing that it does is, can I offer this to you and can I offer this to myself, is this idea that we all will have some struggle and some suffering. And so how can we hold space and connection in this compassionate way? And so if you would like this, I'm happy to pass it along. If you need some comfort, again, the book is Wise Heart by Jack Kornfield. And so you're welcome to kind of use this however you wish. I did this activity once with my thanatology students in the very first class. They all walked in and I had them sit with somebody they didn't know and say this to each other. It was really fun. Some of them said, I don't know that this is the class for me, and others said, okay, this is what I'm here to do. And then I said to them, at the very last class of the year, let's do this again. And they all could do it like that and offer it to each other like total pros. But the first time they did it, I think they really disliked me quite a bit. But they are soft words and invite us again into that space of connection and authenticity and compassion for ourselves and for each other, which again softens those really difficult moments in grief where it feels like it is too much to bear. I think we might have one more, Jan? Yep, there we are. So this is the part where I really open it up to conversation, whether you want to have conversations in small groups, if we want to have a larger group dialogue, if we want to have smaller conversations over coffee. I really just open it up to you in terms of how you would like to use this time.
Can I share a quote that that has really...
There you are.
Thank you. Could I please share a quote that really resonated with me? My husband passed away about 6.5 weeks ago, but he had had an illness for quite some time. And throughout that time when he was ill, I found this quote on grief, and I hope I can remember it. It said, grief never ends, but it changes. Mm-hmm. It's a passage, not a place to stay. Mm-hmm. Grief is not a sign of weakness, nor a lack of faith. It is the price of love.
Yes. Yes.
I love that.
Yeah. You did that beautifully. Yes. Thank you for sharing that. And it is the price of love, right? Often our grief experiences are proportional to how much we loved somebody, right? And so if we, sometimes parents will bring their children in and say, my child is so much more devastated by the death of the dog than their aunt. I say, well, it's the nature of the relationship, right? It's the nature of that connection. So if we really love someone, then the grief is going to match that. Yeah, so thank you. That was very beautifully said. Yeah. Any other comments or questions or opportunities to connect again with each other? Anything you wanted to learn more about that we didn't cover today? Yep, Jan?
I'm lucky in that I haven't had a lot of grief recently, but I've had a couple of friends who have had big losses. And one thing that they find very difficult is the people that say, well, it's been 6 months, a year, half a year, whatever it is. It's time for you to snap out of it. Like, how do you... I'm sure people in this room have heard that. And how do you deal with that? Because, like you said, they'll snap out of it when they're ready to snap out of it, right?
Yeah, we hear that a lot. Or I find it frustrating when you see in the media, people are still grieving Matthew Perry. Matthew Perry just died. He's the person on Friends, right? So when they put in still, it implies, okay, beyond 3 or 4 days, you're done, right? The average bereavement leave from employers in Canada is 3 days. So it implies, again, you should be over it. And what we know from bereavement literature, but also people's experiences, is that first year is really still such a profound adjustment because there are all the firsts. And around that time, there's recognition. People will say, I know it's the first holiday, the first anniversary, the first birthday, and people are there. And there's this sense of almost, I just have to muscle up as much strength as I can to get through it. Because it's going to be like a car crash to deal with it. And so you go through it, but then what people realize then is after that year of firsts and the adrenaline to get through those days that are just going to be unbearable, the second year of bereavement is where the reality lands of this is the new normal. And this is where those shattered assumptions, or this isn't what I signed up for, or I didn't expect this, that's when all of those millions of pieces start to really hit home every day. And so this idea that there's an end point is really not true, which is why we try to move past there aren't stages. It is an ongoing process, right, again, of heavier loss or having days to rebuild and revisit. But it is an ebb and flow, it is not a destination. And so if someone were to say to you, aren't you over it yet? There's some responses we could say that probably aren't church appropriate. But yeah, I bet. That's where with the wine and the tequila, I think. Yeah, that's that version, the not PG version of talking about grief. But I think if people are getting those pieces of why aren't you over this yet, to say my entire life has changed and has unraveled, I'm not sure who can put that together in 6 months. If you have any ideas, please tell me. It's probably what I would say. I probably would add in a few other extra words, but I do think it's okay, again, to lean into that awkward of, I'm surprised that you would think I would be fine after my entire life has been dismantled. I'm shocked that you would even say that. So then you hold the other person accountable for their, perhaps not malicious, but ill-placed insensitivity, and you just own your own grief, right? You kind of step into, this is what's true for me, this is what's authentic for me. And if you hold that really confidently, then all of those comments that come and go, you can quietly say what you wish in your head, but kind of have the confidence to really own your own experience without apology. Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful for people. If you want the not PG version, I'll tell you at coffee. Yes?
I've had a lot of losses in my life, and learned to grieve through them.
Yeah.
My father died in 2020, and we didn't speak regularly ever. And he had Alzheimer's, and my sister decided that my dad and I could talk via Skype once a week. And so before my dad passed, for 4 weeks straight, we just chatted sort of as best he could. And in that time, I was able to let go of my dad and be very at peace. He went into a coma for a week, and I decided to weed the stone path at my house, piece by piece, with no real purpose other than to think of memories of my dad as this happened. And when I got the call that he had passed, that's when I stopped pulling the weeds, and I've never pulled any since then. And I was so at peace. I was so thankful for his passing because he was no longer himself. This past August, our 15-year-old golden retriever got sick and we had to put her down. Stopped me in my tracks,
Yeah.
stopped my wife in our tracks. We couldn't speak, we couldn't do anything. Everything that we touched or felt or saw, middle of the night getting up and my dog Abby wasn't there, would just bring us both to tears, and just overpowering, and just never knowing how powerful grief is going to grab you. And trying to figure out, like, how come I didn't feel the same way with my dad or my mom or close friends, but for some reason with Abby, it was just this really, really, really powerful loss, and it's because of Abby's unconditional love. And no matter what, that love was always flowing to anybody. And one of my best friends who took my dog during her wedding and sat with her, I could barely get the words out to tell him, because I didn't want to inflict that pain on him, because it would then hurt him. Luckily, he knew how much it hurt me to tell him, and he appreciated my struggle in telling him, and that made it easier. And over time, the pain has subsided and changed and evolved. We were able to put Abby in our grounds at where we live and have a little memorial for her and celebrate her life every day. And there's pictures throughout the house of her, which are going nowhere, and how that helps. But 2 weeks after Abby passed, this kitten came out of our woods and decided to live at our place. My wife's allergic to cats. I love cats, but because of her, can't. Just so you know, the cat now lives at home.
Yep, I knew that's where that was going.
And we weren't sure where the cat came from, what was going on, but she wouldn't leave. And so the spirit of Abby has been passed on to this kitten, who has her own personalities, as cats do. And for me to have a cat in my life, I'm pretty excited. The cat does not like me, by the way. It loves my wife, who has the allergy.
That's
I'm okay with that
how they
too. I'm good.
It's in their DNA.
Yes, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for sharing that. And again, the loss, I appreciate you saying this, because the loss of pets, they're family members, right? In our society, not everybody values cats or dogs, but in our culture, it's not uncommon for them to be full-fledged family members. They're the furry children or the full sibling status. And so their absence in the house is so felt, because they are, like, you could walk in the door 10 times a day, and I bet you Abby was just as excited to see you on time 10 as time 1. And so the amount of love and warmth and presence that they have 24/7 is irreplaceable. And so that is a tremendous loss, and also one, like many of you know, that gets sidelined, right? It's just a dog. But why it matters to us is because we have that heart connection. We know how it affects our life. And so whatever happens to us, we are always now doing it in absence of those things that bring us joy or connection or love. And so I would guess in those early days, 50 times a day you went to find her, or to feed her, or let her outside, or go get her outside. And so when we think of it's just a dog, it is 50 moments for you repeatedly every day. So when we think about how losses affect our lives, it's not the loss happened and that's it. It reverberates in so many different moments every day, right? How many times have we talked to somebody and they said, you know, my dad passed 2 months ago, but I was picking up the phone to call him and I realized he wasn't alive, and then you lose them all over again. And so that's what's missing in our capacity to understand grief, so that we miss just that sorrow or that hurt that other people are carrying, and again, that we don't always have words for. So I really appreciate you bringing pets into this. And golden retrievers really are fabulous. Yes.
I watched my mom and my father pass away. My mom took about 3.5 months in the hospital, and I was there every day, and I have closure. I had closure when she passed. I was holding her hand. My father was the same way. We were in the room. My problem is I have no closure with my husband. We had our coffee out on the patio under the gazebo, and he said he's going for a bike ride. No problem. I cleaned around the house and started Sunday dinner. And next thing, about 5 hours later, I was wondering where he went. You know, he's on a motorcycle, you can only go so far. Well, you can go quite a ways, but you know, like a nice ride, your butt must get sore sometime along the ride. And next is 2 OPP at my door, letting me know. Casket was closed, big truck hit him and motorcycle, so I understand. I never got closure. I never got to even see him again. So I've never had closure. There's a difference. Like,
there is,
I don't wish anybody's husband, child, anything to pass away, but usually you'll get closure. You'll see the person. The casket's open. You get to, you know, touch the person again. I still feel like I haven't had closure.
Can I offer something about that?
Yes.
Okay. And I know you had a question as well. So we often hear that we need closure. Closure is one of those, and I know we all say it, but I'll call it one of those fake concepts, because we don't really ever have closure. Defines an endpoint. This is done and over. And then when we go through the 5 stages, we have closure, then don't grieve anymore. It's part of that ethos of grieving. It's to make it nice and clean and tidy, then you're done.
It's gone.
Oh.
I think I just needed to touch.
Yes.
Yes.
Touch. Yeah, no.
So it's that touch hunger. But can I offer you something instead? And it may or may not fit for you. Yeah, we're good? Did I break something? Okay.
Or me. Did I break something? Yes. But yes, okay.
So what we talk about instead, what's in the literature but also in experience, instead of closure, we really encourage our students not to say that, because then it implies you're done grieving. What we go for instead is acceptance and a goodbye.
Yeah.
So if I can offer this again, I don't want to overstep, but what I'm guessing is you didn't get a goodbye. And so then it makes it hard to accept because you didn't see him.
Yes.
And so when we have people who experience it this way, we talked about ritual. What I invite clients into or to do in their own time is to create their own ritual of goodbye. And so then it allows the finality of that loss, again, not closure, but the finality, like this person really isn't coming back. And I've heard this often where when they just leave and you don't see them, there's something, right? Our verbal parts of our brain obviously are well developed, but the image parts of our brain are much more evolutionarily defined. So when you don't have that image or that final, there's a way that that may not resonate.
I have said my goodbyes. I have, personally spoke to him, and said my goodbyes, and said everything I needed to get out of, everything that I thought I should say and everything I wanted to say. And I thought I had said everything, all the goodbyes, wishing that I could have seen him, wishing that I could have just touched him and stuff. But calling him a shithead for leaving, the whole thing, and I just still feel that I have something empty. I've expressed my feelings, I've spoken and stuff, but there's still something empty, something up here that just, and here, that's just not answered, not fulfilled, And you do get the people, 5.5 years. I am sorry for you. I know exactly what you're feeling, what you're going through, and I'm sorry for you. It's still too fresh.
It is fresh.
And it's, I just don't have the one answer I guess I require.
And again, I don't want to overstep, so I'll just offer, you can take whatever fits, but I've heard you say a couple times it's the touch.
Yes.
And so when we think about meaningful rituals, we often listen for what are the pieces that are unfinished. So if there's a ritual that involves some kind of touch, and so this tactile experience, so if you create a collage of your favorite photos, or create a piece of art, or have photos of him, so that he, obviously,
I
isn't
have
here.
photos everywhere.
So I wonder about you having some time to think about creating a ritual where that sense of touch is central.
Okay.
And again, we can chat over coffee if you want. There's
a girlfriend of mine took a work shirt that he always worked in to get on the lawnmower, and it's a plaid work shirt that looked terrible after 18 years of wearing it, and she made a pillow out of it. And it still has, I'm afraid to wash it, and it's been gone 5.5 years, so I'm not sure, but it has his scent on it.
there might
it's
be
in my bedroom, and
there might be some ritual in there somewhere that incorporates touch, and it may come to you eventually. But this is what we often invite people to do, so that those pieces that feel unresolved get some resolution. But I can appreciate that this just feels so bottomless, for sure. Did you want to add anything, Alan?
But what I would like to add is, on behalf of everybody here, Carrie, it's not just what you know, but it's the care and sensitivity that you bring to sharing it with all of us that is so deeply appreciated this evening. Thank you so very, very much. Also,